Hello, we are live. We are live. Give me a wee thumbs up if you are hearing me okay. Welcome to the Class Wars Episode 1 Afterparty. Sorry for the grainy image. It's not tremendously well lit in here, although that episode was quite lit. I'm actually in a little bolt hole up the back roads of East Kilbride, where I've been for a few days, trying to catch up on my book now that the show's all done. And it's been very productive. I've just chat shit for a few minutes until we get some more people in. And if you want to jump on your socials and let anyone you think know who might be interested know that we are live, and that would be great. Share the links, do the stuff. Now, if you want to put any questions in the chat, please feel free. So that's the first time I've seen a finished cut of the first episode. Looked pretty good, came across pretty strong. Some cringy moments for me, obviously. The camera adds a few pounds, your head adds a few pounds, and you probably are overweight, you know. So I was kind of like, it was the vanity that was bothering me, you know what I mean? Because I'd spent a lot of time lifting weights before that show, and maybe I should have spent more time on the fucking treadmill. But there you go. Maybe they'll give me another series where they just pay me to go to the gym. I'm sure that would be extremely exciting. For all of you who I know love my fitness posts. Is the audio okay? I've got a wee microphone. I'll turn it up a wee bit. Okay, well done, Darren. Did not expect to enjoy Class Wars so much. It's really making me think a lot. So human and vulnerable and honest. Thank you, Daisy. Yeah, I feel. This is what I realised when I was doing this, right? So I come from I come out of the left in terms of my activism, right? So class politics is the lens that I construe many things through. Maybe sometimes too many things. And so everything I do when I'm in the public eye, I've always got that in my head. What are the lefties going to think? What is Pollock going to think? And obviously it's just in my imagination, a lot of it. But it is a kind of informal pressure that I deal with. And I think sometimes it's good because it keeps me grounded and focused. And that shows that I'm still tied to my roots and haven't forgotten where I come from. But at the same time, sometimes I feel that politics and activism, particularly online, can be unnecessarily uncharitable when representing other perspectives and points of view. And what I realised, especially in this last year, because there's been a lot of time to reflect and my recovery's been going well, is that actually, as well as my leftism, as well as my belief in class equality, as well as caring passionately about social justice and all of the different strands of social justice, and being prepared to get in people's faces when I need to. The recent Scottish drug minister's resignation being an example of that. At the same time, I also have a natural instinct to cooperate and a natural curiosity about other people from different backgrounds and beliefs. And especially when I'm... is the audio better now? Audio a wee bit better there? I didn't realise the echo had been up. It's been in my bag for a while. Is that a bit better now? That okay? I'll turn it up a wee bit. Right, okay. So, perfect. Okay. So, basically, what I'm saying is, you get this perception online of the left. It's just a bunch of raging lunatics getting in everybody's face, just trying to cancel people left, right, and centre. Right? Literally. The real left isn't like that. The real left's out organising campaigns against 0 hours contracts, trade unionism, tenants unions, important stuff that actually addresses real issues, right? But for me, sometimes when you get involved in that stuff, you're moving in that culture all the time, and you do become sometimes a bit detached from other perspectives and other ways of looking at things, even just to understand the points of view of the people that you have to go and debate. So see, if you're debating with somebody who believes capitalism is the greatest innovation in human history, right? You have to understand what is the logic of that position, and you have to come up with an emotionally intelligent way of dealing with the argument that's not just about your facts and your version of history, but also about, representing their position as reasonably as possible, so that you're not arguing with a caricature. And I think that in doing that, what you do is you make other values visible to the people watching that aren't about your politics, but are about how you carry yourself. Because if you really want to persuade people and you really want to change people's minds in the long run, then people aren't moved by facts. People are moved, I think, by rapport. They're moved by the way that we address each other. When someone's nice to you, it changes the way you feel. You become more open, more receptive. And so I just try to carry that, because I realise that's part of who I am as well. So there's the class politics, and there's the not shying away from saying difficult things, but at the same time, it's in my nature to want to connect with people and understand them better, because that informs my worldview and makes it all the richer. Okay, let's have a look at some of these comments. Thanks for watching, by the way. The response has been great. It was a great feeling the day I was in recording the voiceover for the 4th episode, which I'll probably say is my favourite episode. They're all very strong though. But it was a good feeling today, just knowing it's in the bag. And when you know you couldn't have worked any harder on something, and you couldn't have put any more into it than you did, it's a great feeling. Because after the first series, I don't remember much of doing it. I was in a bad way, I was covering the drug crisis while I was having a drug crisis. Anne-Marie Ward, hello Anne-Marie. Thanks for all your tweets during the show. Darren, I really believe this conversation is well overdue, and thank you for focusing on it. Why do you think people are so reluctant to speak about it? And also, why now is the BBC ready to have a conversation about it at this time? Great question. I think no matter how many times people try to suppress discussion about class inequality, it always re-emerges, because until the material conditions that necessitate the discussion about class and require the discussion about class improve, then people need the language to talk about it. And the language that we've been supplied with in recent years, like meritocracy, which is an ideal, but it's not real, or phrases like social mobility, for example, these serve a very obvious linguistic function and political function, which is that they eradicate class, the language of class, from discussion. But I mean, if you think about, like, say your house burnt down and a police officer came to ask you to describe what happened, and you weren't able to use the word fire, right? Or imagine you almost drowned, but you couldn't describe the water. So what this political concerted effort to remove the potentially divisive language of class from public discussion is about, it's like cutting someone's hands off, or cutting their tongue out. And so what I'm interested in, and where I think I'm most effective in my capacity as an activist, which I carry into everything that I do in all the different areas of the different careers that I've got, is that I'm in a position to contribute to bringing that language of class back into discussion, because my stuff is taught in schools. My stuff is taught in universities at every level of education. They show the films. My book's on the reading lists. I'm being asked all the time to contribute for people's PhDs and dissertations and thesis and this, that, and the next thing. So as much as I'm not an academic, I don't see myself as an academic. I'm not academically trained in that sense. The work that I do obviously has merit for people who are educators, and so the language of class every time an episode goes out is diffused through institutions. It's discussed in workplaces. It might not win 10 BAFTAs, and that's absolutely fine because it's not really why I'm in this game. And so I think that the language of class, until society improves, and some people believe you don't have a shot at dealing with class inequality until you deal with the fundamentals of the capitalist system, right? But unfortunately, we're not at a place in our culture where enough people are ready to have that discussion. So where we are realistically is a discussion about regulating capitalism, higher tax, a new beverage report, maybe a welfare reforms that take the welfare state in a more generous direction rather than what we have just now, which is this kind of Stanford experiment, But that's my view on that. Why now is the BBC ready to have a conversation about it at this time? Well, I mean, it's quite simple, really. When you write a book that wins an Orwell Prize, and it becomes an international bestseller, and you've got a wee bit of clout suddenly. And I was very aware of that, as much as it was a roller coaster. And I was offered all sorts of jobs, right? All sorts of jobs. TV series, TV dramas, people make Peaky Blinders wanted to turn my book into a big fucking TV show thing, whatever. But I was quite focused on the fact that I have a lot of unfinished business first. There are things I've dedicated my life to, and if I'm going to get the opportunity to work on something that's going to be shown on TV, then I have to deal with a kind of an agenda that comes in a certain order. And so that's why the first thing I did was about Scottish hip hop, which dealt with class in subtle ways. And then Darren McGarvey Scotland, which dealt with poverty. And then because of the success of that, I met with the BBC, and the executive that I met, and this is a direct quote, he says, "What would you like to do next?" And he says, and that includes reading names out of a phone book, right? So that was his way of saying, we love what you're doing. It's having an impact in terms of they've got a new channel, they're trying to draw audiences in. I think I tick a lot of different boxes, a lot of rappers' maws are into me, obviously. But then you've got a lot of young people that are into my stuff as well, so I don't know what it is, but it just, for whatever reason, it hits a few different demographics, right? And so this idea of something about class started to emerge. And it was out of conversations initially that I had with Stephen on the phone where we were just kind of spitballing. It's like, well, I do something about class, but it's got to be unconventional. We can't just be looking at lifestyle stuff. And I started drawing from where I was at in my book and throwing different topics out of the book at Stephen, and then he would throw different topics back at me. And we sort of came up with a bunch of subjects we like to tackle, corporate fraud versus benefit fraud, accent, language, appearance, social mobility, examining different aspects of class that you don't really see in mainstream culture, and having the faith that people, while they might not use that certain terminology to describe their experiences, then they would start to intuitively feel this applies to me. I remember sitting in a doctor's surgery and them not believing me that I had something wrong with me. And I didn't know why, I met a guy a couple of years ago, interviewed him, who was having his third heart attack, and he just decided to stay in the house all night and decided he wasn't going to go to the hospital because he was sick of doctors not believing him. and that he was actually just going to go and see his GP in the next morning because she trusted him and had a good relationship with him. And so there's so many subtleties around class. But the BBC, I mean, you're going to find on television what's popular. You know, sometimes executives will take a risk on something, and sometimes it's a safe bet. But ultimately, I think that what they understood was that while the topic of class may be contentious, I've got a certain way of doing things that brings people in, invites people in, even where people disagree. I've got lots of people who follow me who probably don't agree with any of my politics, but I don't block them and I don't shut them out because I need to know what they think, you know. So I think it's just a combination of those things. Big institutions, you know, they do have agendas, but they're often just about remaining relevant, and whatever seems cool, then they'll piggyback on it or they'll support it in some way. And it's only very rare when the topic of class starts to fit into that mold as well. So who knows? I might be wrong. Cousin Alan Taylor, cousin grew up in Apostle Park, son-in-law. Family of 10, late 60s, went to Apostle Park High, went to uni, became head teacher, same school. Don't think it would happen now in 2021. Absolutely. And you know, in any instances where it would happen, that's the instance that would get held up as the example of how the system's fair. So this is what happens, and what I said in this episode was, like, you know, it would be very easy for me to sort of be like, oh, I came from this, and look what I've managed to achieve, and blah, blah, blah. And actually, in truth, I've had a lot of support all through my life, you know, a lot of support. And you can, and so when people hold me up as successful and as an example of how the system works well, they don't realize how unconventional my pathway to where I am now really has been, you know. And that includes people with ridiculous influence and wealth supporting my work in very pivotal ways. Obviously, I still have to produce the content. I still have to produce the goods. But at the same time, I don't walk around thinking I'm any better than anybody else who's not had the same opportunity as me. And so I'm not a poster child for how the system works well. I'm a poster child for what happens when people with money start to like your shit. You know what I mean? They back you. For people, ordinary people in ordinary circumstances, I mean, how do you become a head teacher these days? You know, so you've got your time, your education. If you're not getting hit with a dodgy exam algorithm that's trying to mark you down because you're for a certain postcode, you might get into university. Then when you're in university, not only do you have to deal with the challenges of university, but you also have to deal with all of the kind of cultural stuff that you're going to deal with subtly, you know. And a lot of people from working class backgrounds, they go to university a bit later. So when they go in, they maybe have a couple of kids, maybe they're a single parent. So they're competing with that as well. Maybe they don't even have a car. So there's just so many layers to it. And this is why, like, you know, this theme of social distances really came to the fore of my mind during this pandemic. You know, it's about the distance you have to travel and the baggage that you're carrying in order to compete with people who are already born in situations where they're quite close to the action already. And a lot of stuff in my book I cover, we didn't quite get into in the show. Just social connections, social networks, you know. A social network, not like Facebook. Social network is like a hyper-dimensional entity, right, that exists when people come together. A social network, a community, it has its own memory. It protects itself from injury. And social networks grow around all sorts of things. You have artificial networks. You have natural networks. So when you hear politicians talking about regenerating a community by bulldozing it and dispersing everyone who lives there, what you're really talking about is severing social bonds and social ties that help people organise themselves in life. You're disconnecting them from a shared history. You're disconnecting them from a sense of identity. And so this is one of the big disadvantages that people have when they grow up in these kind of communities that aren't built to last, or they're poorly designed. Because the people across the river who grow up in communities that are well connected, social networks, artificial and natural, professional, all sorts of things. See all the stuff that you see with the Conservative Party just now handing out contracts to their mates? That's all a result of the enmeshment of artificial and natural social networks. They're all connected very tightly, and they look after their own interests because that's what a social network does. Whereas in the poorer communities, the social networks are violently severed. So it's difficult to redress the balance. Even when you pour money in, what happens to it? And social networks are also shown to spread contagion, social contagions, positive or negative. So if you imagine every entity within a social network, every person kind of containing little mini entities that are positively and negatively charged. So you've got somebody who's, right into fitness or right into recovery, but they're also morbidly obese. You know what I mean? And so these spread out through the community. And the more negatively charged parts that there are, the harder the community finds it to pull itself up. Really good programme. Thanks, Donald. By the way, Darren, it was really good to meet you at the Fringe in 2019. Poverty Safari was the best book I read during lockdown, one of the first in a while. Thank you. Good to know that people are buying books again. You should have saw this is how much of a dick I am right now, right? I touch on it a wee bit in there, right? So I'm a sort of absolute fanny now, where the sales of my book went through the floor during lockdown, and I got a royalty check, right, for $6,000. And I was fucking gutted. Like, I felt like I was facing financial ruin. That is how weird my life has been. Do you know what I mean? I'll elaborate on that story in the book, but thanks for buying a book. I hope a few other 1,000 people have bought books as well, because I'll tell you something. I've got fucking bills to pay. And I spent a lot of money not realising I had to pay tax. Right, okay, let's see. Is that my wife jumping in there? Oh, she knows all about it. She knows all about it. Exactly what we said, the idea that a suit defines your eligibility to be listened to. No. Aye. And he was a nice guy. Simeon was a nice guy. All the contributors I spoke to were pretty nice. Even ones I didn't agree with and that had views that I was just like, oh, come on. Most people, if you talk to them in person, are okay. It's when you get onto difficult subjects that we reveal ourselves as likable or unlikable or disagreeable. But generally, people are all right. Let's see. Christine, it's frustrating but true that we are judged by our accents in society, but it is so knowing the rules helps, but it's also irritating. Yeah, absolutely. It is irritating. Now, here's the most irritating aspect of it. The accent that is least prevalent is also the most trusted. So the accent that's spoken the least in the UK and even less in Scotland is the accent that people from all over the UK regard as the one to trust. This is the newsreader, right? The RP accent. So that tells you everything you need to know about what sociologists would refer to as hegemony, right? Some people pronounce that differently. We'll just go with that, right? How does a society maintain whatever structure it is that allows the class inequality to continue? And how does it make people in the lower social orders believe that either there's no other way to organise society or that actually that's in their interests? And part of that is about the values of the upper classes being diffused through all of our institutions. So that's why BBC newsreaders for a long time spoke like the upper classes. They might not have been upper class, but in order to gain access and move up the ladder, they adopt those characteristics. And that's well evidenced as well as the bit in the show where I talk about people from Edinburgh's upper middle classes taking elocution lessons to remove the Scottish sound from their voice. So in this independence debate, we've got a lot of people who get criticised or dismissed for being English when they're not English, they're Scottish. And it's just another area where class manifests. Sally Ann Kelly completely relate to that sense of being torn between classes. Absolutely. Alana Hughes, did you find that throughout Scotland people had a similar outlook on class social mobility? I think the biggest myth in Scotland is that we're this sort of plucky wee left-wing country, right? That we are kind of this plucky wee left-wing country that's just been subjected to just some kind of bullying from our big corporate parent, England. We would have had an empire, if we had a fucking not got pished and decided to go and try and start it in the most fucking unsuitable place in the world, right? So we came into the Union because the elites in Scotland done deals with the elites in England, right? So that would suggest that there are elites in Scotland and that they operate in the same way as elites anywhere. Now, what we have in Scotland actually is you got a lot of urban centres, like towns, cities, where poverty is concentrated. But you have vast areas where, where there aren't plush villages and towns. You just have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of land, all owned. And that seems peripheral to us. That doesn't seem important. Land ownership seems like this distant issue, right? But when you consider that the same families have owned most of Britain for the last 1,000 years, and it's just been reported in the last few days, while the Queen often presents herself as a symbolic role, actually, she's been looking through the laws and going, "No, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to me. Doesn't apply to me." And that's partly because she owns so much land. So one thing we're not making anymore. Ian Wood, not a question, but I've always found it difficult to come from a working class family but grown up in an affluent town and assimilated a middle class accent and behaviours. Yeah, and it is difficult, and I touch on that in the show. You get imposter. Somebody asked me in an interview the other day about imposter syndrome, and everybody thinks imposter syndrome's this thing just everybody just gets and they just ignore it because really they are worthy. When actually we get imposter syndrome because we are imposters. We are imposters because our body keeps the score all the time, and every interaction we have and every relationship we have, there's a part of ourselves we hold back. We hold something back. And so we are inauthentic. That's how we manage the negotiation of society, because you can't just be completely on all the time, and if you are, you'll get locked up somewhere, right? You'll be extricated from society. Just people wouldn't put up with it. And so there is a tension when we know we're adopting certain mannerisms or behaviours or even attitudes and values. Now, it's a slow process, so it happens kind of step by step, incrementally. And one thing I notice about a lot of people maybe 20 years older than me who come from working class backgrounds but have become successful middle class people thanks to the golden age of social mobility, but they still identify they see them feel working class, so they find me irritating because what I'm saying contradicts their experience. But what I observe in them is that this shift that they go through, where they started off kind of radical and believing in wealth redistribution and stuff that's not radical, stuff that's quite sensible. And then when they grow up and they have kids and they buy houses and they get mortgages, they dismiss all that as just the kind of naivety of youth, when actually it wasn't naive. They just decided to change, and that's okay. But don't dismiss it as naivety just because you no longer hold those beliefs, because those beliefs are valid. Just say, I changed my beliefs because I decided I was more important and my family were more important than the wider society, which just seemed beyond my comprehension or expertise or assistance. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. This is what I really struggle with just now, because I believe that must happen so subtly that it happens beyond our awareness a lot of the time. And we create little justifications for it along the way. Like, who would blame me if I just went back to whoever was trying to offer me film deals and all that and just be like, aye, cool, I'll put all my family's life on the telly. Who cares? Give me the money. I've got kids. I'm doing this for my kids. Do you know what I mean? Fuck everybody else. You know what I mean? I'll just give all that. I'll give them money if they don't like it. You could tell yourself that bullshit. You could try to have some integrity. But it's a struggle, and especially when you move house, you move communities. So you're no longer confronted by the poverty, you're no longer confronted by the inequality. So then you can start, like people looking out the window of their mansion or looking at the world from the side of their own mountaintop that they own. The world seems terribly simple from some vantage points. So I understand now more than I did maybe previously how people from privileged backgrounds who just commute to their work and don't have to drive through a housing estate come to some crazy conclusions about what poverty entails and what we have to do about it. Seeking to understand, therefore, leads to an acceptance of class war. Where's the war? Bring it. Absolutely, Tracy. This is, this is a kind of call to action in terms of getting in people's faces. But unless that is organised in a politically coherent, culturally coherent way, where there's a strategy that has been adopted, and then that is being carried out, then getting in people's faces, just all adds to this narrative. Just all adds to this narrative that the left doesn't have a clue. There's a lot of really effective left-wing campaigns operating in Britain right now. Some of the best ones, exemplary ones, are in Scotland. And that's been the case since I was a child. So if people want to change society, they need to go and join a tenants union. They need to go and actually look for something tangible that already exists and support that in some way. I know that you probably do, Tracy, but I think you got a lot of people that are just like, right, I'm fucking raging, let's fucking do it. There's people out there that's been doing that for a while and they've calmed right down. They're still angry, but they channel their anger into organising and educating themselves, and that's a good way to do it. And seeking to understand other people is a valuable use of your time. It really is. Thought it was sad for the American lady who felt she needed to be more Scottish sounding to be accepted. Absolutely. She was lovely. I mean, they were all lovely. But yeah, I felt for her. I spent quite a bit of time talking to her about that, because I could sense that, and I found out a wee bit more about her as well. And she was really, really nice. Jamie Son, actually, Jenny. Hello, Jenny. Yeah, she's just talking to Alana there. Jamie Saunderson. I'm from a working class background and I actually enjoy operating in middle class spheres. There's a weird mischievous thrill that accompanies the imposter syndrome. Do you ever experience that? Yes. What I like about it is because people make assumptions that I'm aggressive based on my accent or based on my emotional tone or my sense of humour. Then actually, if you are aware of that, you can use that to your advantage in certain situations to establish yourself within a little hierarchy. That's not about, I don't pretend to be aggressive, but I just have a sense, particularly when middle class professionals or people in media, when they meet me, they might have a kind of pre-rehearsed self-deprecating remark that they say about their big car or something, because they see me as the sort of person who's scanning that, looking at that, you know. I remember somebody apologising once because they had a pool. They had a pool, right? They made money, they done well, they got a swimming pool, right? And like apologising for themselves for having a swimming pool. That's not the sort of thing I'm judging. That's not the sort of thing I care about, you know. Um, but in certain situations, when you realise people are doing that because they're trying to kind of endear themselves to you or ingratiate themselves to you or engaging in some kind of studied informality, then you can play with that. You know, I can sort of compare it to maybe the way some women, aware of how they're being perceived by men sexually, might use that and to an advantage in certain situations, right? Situations as well. But I certainly do know women who have talked about an awareness of their sexuality and how they can use that to negotiate their way through things, rather than rather than letting other people do all the controlling the dynamics all the time. So I guess a bit like that. And I think that actually that shows him. I think that the benefit of moving different spheres is that you actually become genuinely socially sophisticated. So sophistication in our society is anything that's upper class, middle class. You're sophisticated if you enjoy theatre. You're sophisticated if you could quote Shakespeare. You're sophisticated if um, you know you play the cello, right, and you go to the opera. But the thing is, when I meet people like that, and I do, when I meet people like that, they tend only to mix within their own social spheres. Whereas in the course of a day, I could have been working in a prison and then been at a recovery meeting with somebody who's just coming back after a rattle, right? And then talking to a politician, and then doing media, and then seeing them, and then doing a public speech, and then going home to my kids, my wife, my family. So who's more sophisticated socially? You know, and this is something that people don't realize about kids particularly who grow up in pretty hostile backgrounds and communities. They're so sophisticated, but their sophistication's not really measured. What we measure is the challenging aspect of their behaviour. And what we tell them is we need you to become resilient, when actually they're a lot more resilient than the people handing out the resilience medals, you know. If the people handing out the resilience medals, you throw them into the situation the kids are in, how will they cope? So, it's just when you realise things like that, it's empowering, right? My pet rocket. Hey, Darren, my mum was a teacher born into poverty in the late 40s. She wrote a wee poem. It begins, middle class, who me, just because I've got a degree, sums it up. That's it's a good opening line as well. Uh, Ruth Mills Dance. Yes, you're a brilliant researcher. Well, actually, I have to also give a shout out to Darren, in particular Stephen Bennett, director, because this is a big collaboration, right? So, a lot of the topics that we decide to cover in the film came out of our initial discussions, right? But then they also went away, and then they basically brought a lot of those discussions to life by lining up contributors who had a lot of the vital information that we need, as well as a lot of research, right? So, I could take a certain amount of credit for bringing a certain amount of understanding to the table, generally, where matters of this kind are concerned. But even with my, uh, you know, considerable understanding around matters of social inequality, there was still brilliant chestnuts of research that were put to me, including one that I read today in the voiceover that I won't spoil. but I just ended up stopping the voiceover. I was just like, this is a brilliant piece of research. So it's a big collaboration, you know. And I've been really emphasizing that in all the media that I've been doing, because obviously as the presenter, you take the risk. If people don't like it, it's on you. If people like it, you get the credit, right? But I just need people to know that, you know, it doesn't happen without a lot of people working on it and having conversations and discussion and sometimes debates about it. And it's just because we've got a good rapport and we trust each other that I think that shows in every frame of the film. Um, the BBC has had a problem with class itself since its inception. It's trying to change, but there's still a paucity of working class voices and folk working for the BBC from a working class background. Yes, naturally, there's people there from a working class background who have already sort of learned to conceal it, right? I mean, I get contacted a lot by people, you can imagine. Um, and it's people who work in middle class institutions, you know, universities, medical profession, education. It's people who um, relate to what I say or feel empowered by something that I've said, identify with it. So there's a lot of people out there who come from working class backgrounds and they're already going through that chameleon phase that they feel that they have to go through. But yeah, I mean, if you don't have somebody who's experienced the benefit system sitting around a table when a program about benefits is being pitched to an editor, then who's going to interject and say, actually, see what you're doing? It's actually quite stupid and cruel, and you might want to think about changing the idea because it's quite toxic, actually, what you're talking about. Um, but I know none of you will know that because none of you have been on benefits. Guess this is the only positive thing about the pandemic. You know, why do you think universal credit went up 20 quid? It's because a load of middle class people were on benefits, and they didn't want them to know how evil it is. Um, Hi Darren, I found it interesting. Thank you, Marley Davidson. Uh, Dating within and out with your class. How do you how? But how does class also impact someone's cultural significance? Right, okay. I'm not quite sure the exact meat of the question, so I'll just speculate, right? Someone's cultural significance. Well, in my own experience, what I find is um, that uh, until very recently, and it was a conscious decision when I agreed to do this series, I says I don't want to be in housing schemes. I don't want to be pointing camera in poor people's faces. I want to be in rooms with people who have done well, who have made money, who have certain attitudes and values that I want to explore. I want to go into rooms with people where I don't feel so confident and see what that's like. And dress up in the tweeds and play the cricket and do all of these things. And part of the reason I've done that is because I was fed up with being presented as someone from a scheme, you know, like stand next to this brick wall, sit on this staircase, look angrier. It seemed like there's a certain visual style and aesthetic that has to accompany people who come from certain backgrounds. And so the one that accompanies me or people like me is urban dereliction. Um, I mean, even if you look at somebody like Irvin Welsh, who's ridiculously successful and very down to earth as well, you know what I mean, and was a big supporter of the book initially in the start in the early days, and he when Trainspotting came out, the conversation going on between the cultural commentariat largely was, does this book glamorize drugs? This is a book that people who have injected heroin regard as the highest form of poetry that's so true to their lives. Um, and people from certain backgrounds who just hadn't fucked with those kind of drugs just couldn't comprehend that was poetry because poets write like this and they speak with this kind of voice. I sort of touched on that point when I made the kind of rather angry point about Robbie Burns. I wasn't trying to compare myself to Robbie Burns. I was making a broader point about the hip hop community and all the rappers that I know and my own music, and how it's not actually that structurally or thematically different from a lot of what would be considered classic Scottish poetry. But for some reason, when we talk, it's vulgar. But when they talking right, it's beautiful poetry, but it's the same kind of Scots dealing with the same kind of themes. Spoke to a guy who was an expert in housing, and what he said was basically a community is not inherently of any social class. A house gains its value based on who lives in it. That's how powerful social class is. And you can take that as a metaphor when you're talking about language. Last one, right? And then I need to finish up. Hi, mate. Really enjoyed tonight's show, as I always do with your stuff. My partner and I were analysing our class and upbringing as a result. How would you describe yourself now? I mean, obviously, the pandemic-wise, it's been a bit of a blow for all of us in different ways. See, what happened with me class-wise is book came out, opportunities came, money, flooding in from everywhere, right? I never dealt with that amount of money before. I didn't necessarily know how to handle it. My first instinct was just to make everyone around me comfortable, right? Which is a good thing to do. But I didn't understand. There was an aspect, I'm self-employed, right? So there's an aspect of the tax system which is you pay your tax, but then you have to pay the tax for next year up front as well, right? Which is a bit easier if you're earning 7 grand or even 20 grand, right? Which is what I was earning before the book. And so basically what it means is you're paying 30 grand in tax and then you're paying another 30 on top. But I hadn't been saving that money aside because I didn't know about that. So what happened was, then I get hit with the tax. Then I get hit with the pandemic. So suddenly I go off with fucking scatter cash to just being in a big hole, you know, and ending up in fucking rehab, which isn't cheap either. So how would I describe myself now, class wise? Even withstanding that financial turbulence, because I'm plugged into these social networks now where opportunities exist, I'm a bit more resilient than I would have been before. Because even if I just looked at my bank now and there was no money, I would be able to generate opportunities because there's a certain kind of recognition there. And I think that that's more sort of cultural capital. Do you know what I mean? And so I would say that places me firmly in middle class terrain. Although I still feel very connected to my working class background. And I think I'll just leave it there for tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us. Sorry if some of that stuff there was a wee bit too personal. You know, when I'm talking, it's particular in this kind of dynamic where it's people that I know that are definitely interested in what I want to say. I just sort of think about it through the perspective of what would I want somebody that I was watching to talk about, you know? And I always 9 times out of 10 I'm interested in a wee bit more about them, you know, personal stuff. Okay, guys, I'm really grateful to you. Who are the key figures that greased the wheel, spill the beans, bro? Ewan McGregor, thank you for that question. It wasn't so much people greasing the wheels. You know, the path was set. It was happening. It was just a case of what scale was it going to be. So when people like Irvin Welsh, right, or Denise Miner, or J.K. Rowling offer you quotes to put on the front cover of your book, that's people helping you, right? Now they were doing that recognition of my potential as a writer, right? And they have been through their own struggles, so they recognise where I was coming from. But not everybody who gets the chance to write a book gets that kind of support, right? So if you want to use terms like grease the wheels, well, there you go. Okay, guys, listen, thanks very much. I hope that you'll join next week, straight after the show again. We'll do this again. And I'm grateful for you all for watching. And take care of yourselves and take care of each other, all right? Peace out.